Go.
Good morning, it's Somewhere, and we're back in the Constellation 2020 Green Room. Joining us is comic book and voice artist Sonny Strait, famously known for voicing the lingerie ghost in Panty and Stocking.
Yeah, that's what I'm known for. The lingerie ghost from Panty and Stocking. That's my
So
biggest
we,
hit,
we,
really.
we, we wanted to open with your big credit for in case people don't know you.
Well, you know what? If that's all people know me for, that's perfect.
Well, you want to talk about some of the other stuff that you've done voice work for?
Yeah, because I can barely remember the lingerie ghost. It was just one session. Yeah, primarily I'm known for the voice of Krillin from Dragon Ball Z. I was also the original Toonami Tom for Cartoon Network. Let's see. As a comic book artist, I'm primarily known as for my work on ElfQuest, but I've also been published by Tokyo Pop on my own stuff, and I've been a self-publisher since 1988. Yeah, when I
So what
started with
got you
my
to do
Lily.
self-publishing?
Huh?
What got you to do self-publishing?
Well, I was going to college in Denton, and I was a theater major, and I'd always drawn, like I had drawn comics for the my high school and college newspapers, and I went to my local comic book store, and this guy was drawing his own comic books, and it was called The Sex Gophers from Hell, and it was about this rock band, and it was amazing. You know, it was so punk and edgy and stuff, and I love punk, and so I drew him some fan art. You know, because this guy's a local cartoonist. I bet he
Yeah.
didn't get any, he wasn't going to get any fan art, and he saw it and he said, "Oh, dude, you need to draw the book." Because he liked my art better than his, and I was like, I've never drawn a comic book before, but I, I said, let's give it a whirl. And I did, and I loved it. I just fell in love with the medium, and I just didn't want to do anything else. And I got, we got our first 10-page story published probably about a year into when I started drawing. And I just dropped out of college and focused on comics for about 10 years. And we'd self-published another title called Mr. Average. It was pretty, it got a nice grassroots following for a while. And so I've always loved it. I love independent publishers. That's why Wendy and Richard are heroes of mine because
Hmm.
they're independent. They're like some of the, maybe the biggest independent publishers ever to exist.
Yeah, Wendy and Richard Pini are pretty amazing people.
Hmm.
Um,
Well, Wendy is, and I've told this story so many times, but she is, I apprenticed under her. So she's my sensei. And to this day, she still teaches me. You know, I met her at Comic Con, but I met her at Comic Con as a voice actor. And turns out she was a fan of Dragon Ball Z, which was just bizarre to me. But she said, "Yeah, me and my dog, we watch Dragon Ball Z every day." And uh,
well, she was into cosplay before cosplay was the thing. She's actually got very involved in the community for a really long time.
I think that's why we relate so much because she's also a performer. You know, it's like a lot of it was real fun. One Comic Con after Wendy and I'd already worked for Wendy, but she invited me and my voice actor friends to join her and her comic book friends. You know, and it's such a strange mix of people because you know actors are very gregarious and cartoonists are very withdrawn most of the time. And it was funny. You could see the cartoonists looking at these actors dancing on the tables, going, "Oh, "We make an interesting character," you know, and the actors are just, "Bleh!" And I always go back and forth between the two. But Wendy, she also does. She's a very performance-based human being. I mean, she was like spent years learning a dance and things like that as well. So she when she did the Red Sonja thing that was actually on the Merv Griffin show, and I think that's why we relate because you know she's more on the comic book end, and I was more on the performing end, but together we kind of meet in the middle.
Speaking of performing, I understand you also do music.
Uh, I wouldn't be so brave as to call what I do music, but I have done some. I've been in a couple of bands. Um, I was in a band called Chin's Mojo for a while, playing keyboards. I I don't really play keyboards, but I was in a scuffle, was a legal scuffle with a comic book company that tried to steal some of my ideas, and I went head to head with their lawyer and ended up winning, just me against their lawyer, and I was so proud of it. And my buddy who had a band said, "Well, you need to buy a MO6 keyboard and play in my band. And I said, what? He goes, yeah, you got to do something silly with that money. You got to, it's not every day you beat the forces of evil. So I brought a Yamaha MO6 and I learned the keyboard riffs of his band songs, and that was cool. And then my wife, she's always been a fan of this band called X. It was a punk rock band back in the 80s. They were really big. And so she wanted to do a cover band with them. And so I said, cool, I'll help you start your band. And then she said, no, I want you to sing in it with me. So next thing I know, I'm singing in a band, playing keyboards in another band, and I have no interest in being in a band. But there I am. And then one of the guys in our punk band, he and I started another band just because the convention wanted me to come out and bring my band. So I said, well, let's start a band and do that. And we wrote an album like 5 months before the convention and brought it and performed it on the stage. So
look how casual. It's like, so we need an
Go
album.
ahead.
So we spent 5 months and we had an album after we formed the band spontaneously.
Yeah, I think it was pretty good too. I mean, I like it. I like the kind of music that it was producing. And it's so weird that, it's not really my interest, but if it's artistic, I like to put my hands in it, Any kind of artistic endeavor, interpretive dance on there, whatever you want.
There you go. I do have to tell you, maybe I've watched too much anime, but
Yes,
when you
have.
started that explanation of I ended up in a band because I had to go up against a lawyer, I had this image for a moment of it being a keyboard duel between you and the lawyer for the honor of who was in control of the copyright.
It was very, very close to that. Yeah, I don't want to go into too many details, and that's part of the thing I signed up with them on. But I will say this. I ended up getting twice as much as what I'd asked for to begin with. And yeah, it was, again, I can't talk too much about the case, but it was amazing that I was able to do that. And I realized, these lawyers are just people too,
Mm-hmm. And
if
you'd
you're
only gotten the
logical with
original amount, you would have only had 44 keys on your keyboard. But
Exactly, yeah. I probably would not have been in the band because I could only afford, I wouldn't be able to afford anything actually. So, but it worked out really good. Yeah, that actually would be a good manga, actually. A
Mhm.
story about fighting a lawyer to buy a keyboard for a band.
I think that's definitely something you should do.
I should acknowledge the bands that I bought the keyboard for was a band called Chin's Mojo, and the other band was called White Girl.
And what kind of music?
The first band's more alternative rock. Chin's Mojo was alternative rock, and then X was the big inspiration of White Girl, so it was very punk. And we did some other covers too. I remember we did the song "Stepping Stone." I'm not just stepping stone, and we did that in a punk rock version. It sounded really cool.
Is
And
there
then
any place where there are links for all this stuff where people
you,
might hear you?
to hear the old stuff, I mean, you could probably find some Chin's Mojo on YouTube. As a matter of fact, you can look Chin's Mojo Roller Coaster. I think I'm going to give this guy a plug, but hey, Tom, you go to Chin's Mojo on YouTube and you find a roller coaster video that I actually directed and played keyboards in. If you go to whitegirlstudios.com, you can hear some of the band's latest incarnations, which was just me and the keyboardist and my wife. And where we kind of evolved into something more industrial at that point. As a matter of fact, the album's called High Noon Industrial.
Very, very nice.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, we should have pre-planned and gotten you to play a little music.
Let me get my guitar.
Yeah?
And I picked up guitar a couple of years ago just because I think I was a midlife crisis and I didn't want to spend all my money on a new car. And I didn't want to leave my wife for somebody 20 years younger. So I ended up just picking up the guitar. And I've got to the point where I can play chords. I know pretty much any chord to play, so I can write songs with it. I just would never perform as a guitarist. But when I started my studio, we started doing animation there. And of course, we did have a theme song, so I was writing theme songs. And luckily, I had a guy who was an actual musician, Spencer. Hi, Spencer. This kid was a student of mine, but it turns out he was very talented as far as writing music and sound effects and engineering. And so I would just write him with the chords and I'd say, this is the melody and here's the chords, and he would come up with something that actually sounded presentable. So you can see that on YouTube. Go to Sunny Street Studios on YouTube and see the videos. especially if you look at the cartoon Level Lad, which are based on my grandson. And it was our first attempt to do a real cartoon. I think it's like 7.5 minutes long. And
Mhm.
it's an opening theme and closing theme, and parodies a lot of Hanna-Barbera cartoons from the 70s.
So I know animation versus comic book art is actually really, really different, especially the labor-intensive aspects of it. What was your experience of transitioning from doing one to the other?
Yeah, it's a completely different animal. Because you with comic books, the main difference is in comic books you don't need as big a crew. You know, one guy can be the crew of a comic book. Whereas at the bare minimum we had with 3 people working on stuff, and I felt that we were way understaffed. You know, we could have accomplished a lot more if we had a bigger staff. But you know, we're all doing this gratis anyway, just to see what happens. But yeah, it's an expensive endeavor that as well. But also, it's the approach is different. You're thinking very slowly, you know. And comics itself is slowing down time because you're taking this aspect and moving slowly to this, you know. But when you're animating, it's way slow, and it actually affects your perception of time a bit too. When you're working all day on animation, that way you start seeing things like the world's going too fast around you, you know.
So is that why Dragon Ball Z fights take 12 episodes?
Yeah, that's exactly why. It's because the time has been distorted for the animators in Japan, and so it took them a week to start a fight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How long did the 7.5 minute video actually take to put together?
I want to say it took us 2.5, 3 months. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
That's a
then
lot
we
of
got
dedication.
into what's that?
That's a lot of dedication.
Yeah, especially from my assistants Gemma and Spencer. They're the ones who were spending the most time. What we did was I would design the characters and I would draw them out, give them basic puppets, and we did a kind of like Flash style animation. So they
Mhm.
just moved my puppets around. Occasionally, I'd do some walk cycles and stuff like that. But on the level that thing, everything that you see on there that's drawn, I drew it. And then Gemma primarily was the one moving the characters around, and Spencer was primarily doing the sound effects and music with me.
Sounds like a very ambitious kind of thing to do. Is it a thing you'd do again, or it was a good experience to have once?
I don't know that I'd do it again. I have to have my own studio again, and I don't know. We could probably do it remotely. Maybe if there's an opening of time. Lately, there is not an opening of any kind of time. It was so weird too because when the shutdown happened, we were all in quarantine for months. There was nothing to do, right? Nobody was doing anything, and even my studio I put on hold because I couldn't bring people in for my classes.
Mhm.
And so I waited for about 3 months, and then I said, I can't hold this anymore. I'm going to switch this to being online. So I had to reformat everything to be online, and then all of a sudden, everybody wants to work again. Funimation wants to work again. Wendy wants to work again, and I'm trying to start my classes again. I'm like, oh my god, it's like I'm retooling my entire career to be inside this little box here. And now this little studio room, which is our guest room at our house, now has a section that has this soundproof booth in it, and over there it's got a drawing table, and then of course here's my computer area, and it's all done in this one little space.
So what did it take to build enough of a sound studio into your apartment? That sounds like a very expensive
I had a
endeavor.
professional studio, and so what I did was I took all the soundproofing from the other studio and put it up here on the walls here, and then luckily the guy Neil Malley, who's one of the head engineers at Funimation, and he's also a guy who's my partner when I first started teaching the classes, and he taught me a lot about soundproofing and how to layer your soundproofing to make it work right. And so it sounds great. It's in there. It's just that there is just enough room for these 3 spaces here with this. If I expand any further, like say if I want to do a painting, you're not going to be doing any paintings on it. So just forget it. There's no room for you to do paintings. Luckily, I don't paint that.
You just have to knock down your neighbor's place and annex it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we're talking about where we want to move next, and now that everything is online, we're thinking of maybe move up north somewhere where it's cooler. Texas is really freaking hot, and making sure that the space we buy is big enough that I can expand in the space itself.
So we were talking about the voiceover stuff, and we kind of ran past that real quick. And I know you get asked about that probably in every interview. But what kind of stuff did you particularly enjoy doing? What kind of stuff is coming up now that you've got your new setup?
Well, honestly, when you're voice acting, it's always fun. There's never a day where, oh man, I have to go to work. Although these days, you kind of feel that way because now we record it from our houses. And the system that we're using, the actors are also engineers. We have to, move the sound files around and edit them and set the record button. So you're doing a lot of right, left brain stuff. So you got to go set it up, then you got to be a performer. Set it up, and be a performer. So that, and I'm getting used to that. I've only done like 4 sessions now, and it becomes easier each time. But I do remember dreading like the second day I had to do this. Like, oh no, this is so frustrating. But when you're going to Funimation to record, which I've done most of the past 20 years, it's a blast every time. It doesn't matter what I'm working on, I'm having a good time, and you're never disappointed that you have to go to work. It's a lightning creativity process, and you're on the edge, and you're just riding that lightning, and it's so fun.
It sounds really exciting. So I know because of this, you've had the opportunity to go to a lot of anime conventions. Obviously not now in the after time.
Right. Well, that's another thing that had to be adjusted. So now conventions are all done online, and so there's 4 aspects of my career are having to be readjusted. Now, if my career was just drawing comics, it'd be a lot easier. Comics really hasn't changed. That's been online for years now. But conventions, that's a little different. I really miss having an audience, And the closest thing I've had to that is when I teach my classes, because I can get like 10 students plus the engineer and myself on there. And I can hear like people laugh when I make a joke. It's refreshing to hear that. It's like, oh, that's almost like an audience. But it doesn't compare to the hundreds of people that would show up to your panels, and you feel this wave of energy that is just unmatched by anything except maybe theater.
I've had the opportunity for the last 7 years to teach a creative writing workshop at Otakon. And
oh, cool! I've been there.
Room full of people in costume is a good room to teach creative anything.
Yes.
So
yeah,
I know
they're already in a
exactly
creative state of mind.
Yep.
Yeah,
so next time Otakon's open, maybe you can come to my stuff. I'll come to your stuff.
I would love to. Yeah. I would love to go to HandyCon right now. I would love to just see people. My wife and I, that's the main person I see, my wife. And I was thinking this morning, we got into a conversation about why paint, paint on a wall. It's like your conversations are getting stranger and stranger, but we were like, yeah, paint's a good thing, because it's an artifice, right? But it's an intentional one. So in a way, it's art. Like we were talking about, like panels, like the cheap paneling they put on a lot of walls and houses, right? But if you put white paint on it, it's acceptable because it's an imitation wood, but it's an attempt at art on a very minor scale. This is the conversations we're having now. I need to get out of the house. I'm talking about paint.
So let's get you on a wildly different topic. Okay. I was told to ask you, and I'll just use the one word and see where it goes. Goat?
Goat.
Yes.
Goat is a creation of mine. She's a character in a series I did called We Shadows, and I was first published by Tokyo Pop. We Shadows is a modern telling of the characters from A Midsummer Night's Dream, basically, Titania, Oberon, and Puck. And Goat is my creation, but in my story, Puck, from the research I've done about Robin Goodfellow, who is the Puck from Midsummer Night's Dream, he was supposed to be the son of Oberon and a human milkmaid, right? That Oberon seduced. So he's half fairy, half human. And Oberon himself was supposed to be the child of Queen Mab and Julius Caesar. So actually, Robin Goodfellow is only like a fourth fairy or something, right? So I thought, okay, well, if he's immortal, then he's going to get really bored being immortal, and eventually he's going to have enough. And fairy the world of fairy is so dependent upon belief by humans, and so once the industrial age hit, I figured that the fairies just started going to sleep, and he's surrounded by all these people who are asleep, and he's bored out of his mind. So he leaves and he joins the gods in intergalactic, interdimensional battles and stuff, and just leaves Fairy behind. Well, that leaves Fairy without a puck. So my character Goat, she ends up taking the mantle of the new puck, and that's basically the story. And it ran. I had one good graphic novel in me, and Tokyo Pops wanted me to do three. So I was like, okay. I had nothing else after the first one. But by the time I'd finished the first one, I'd had the second one written, and I knew where I wanted to go. And so I did the second one for them, and then Tokyo Pop folded. They had what had happened. They had all their money invested in Borders mostly. And you remember Borders bookstore chain?
Mm-hmm.
No one thought that that would fold, right? But it folded, and then suddenly there with half their revenues gone, and they fell apart pretty quickly. So they paid me to do book two, but it never saw print. And I'm probably one of the few artists at Tokyo Pop who had signed many contracts before from doing animation and doing other comic books. So I had a stipulation in my contract I thought I would never use, which was if the book is not printed within a certain time of acceptance, then all rights go back to me. And Stu Levy, the guy who was the president, I guess he still is, because they're starting to do more Tokyo Pop stuff now. I wrote to him and I said, "Hey Stu, if you check clause 17C, I'll always remember 17C for the rest of my life because it allowed me to keep my word." Mm-hmm. And he said, "You'll see that if this isn't printed by October, which is coming up in a couple of months, then the rights will come back to me." And he said, "Oh, you're right. Well, best of luck to you." And so I got the rights back, and then so now I had two graphic novels on my hands. So I put it online as a webcomic and released a page a day, 5 days a week. And it started getting a really nice following. It was in the top 10 webcomics, for most of its run. And by the time when I got toward the end of it, I went, "Oh crap, I should do something else." And so I thought, well, what I want to do is write a book called Goat, which would focus on everything that the graphic novels didn't tell you about this character and where she came from. And so that went over really well. I self-published that. I think I made more off of self-publishing that one story, than I've made on any single issue I've ever worked on before. And then I decided, you know what, I'll just improvise it. And I had a really good time just drawing this thing on the fly and just letting the story go wherever it wanted to go. But then my favorite cousin died in an automobile accident.
Sorry to hear that.
Yeah, and it was something. I was like, well, that was the only thing I wanted to talk about. It was the only thing on my mind. So my comics started reflecting that. I started writing about him, and then it was like, well, this is interesting. It could be a pretty interesting story, in real time, watching somebody go through the grieving process. But as the grieving process got even more intense, it was like, I don't want to share this. This is personal. I mean, there's just so much I want to give. And so I just stopped. I just focused on nothing. And I was weird too, because for a while I just couldn't even draw, And then about a year later, Wendy said she's doing the final quest for Dark Horse. And she said, I don't have the time to draw, and color this. And Dark Horse said, I can have any colorist I want, and I wanted you. And I said, oh, okay, I would love to do that. Because that wasn't the problem with being creative and being, going through mourning, is that drawing something, especially a comic book, is such a personal process that you're having to examine everything about you. And when you're going through a grieving process, you don't want to examine everything all the time. You can't survive that way. You have to shut things down just to get through the day sometimes. But here she's asking me to color. Well, that's a creative process, but I'm not like exposing my soul so much. This is
Hmm.
just I'm enhancing her artwork with color. And so it was a good way for me to get back into comics again. And we did that for I think 4 years. And by then, I had gone through the grading process, and I'd actually started drawing some. And then they had finished the final quest, and they wanted to do more stories. And they asked me if I would be interested in drawing the next series. And I was like, it's been so long since I've drawn ElfQuest. I drew ElfQuest back in 2001, you know. So I said, well, I don't even know what that would look like. Let me do a couple of pages, and if you guys like it, then we can proceed further. And so I did a couple of pages, and they loved it. And then Richard said, hey, can you do two more? We'll make it an official proposal with Dark Horse. And so I did two more pages, and they sent the 4 pages to Dark. And I believe they thought it was Wendy's at first,
Hmm.
even though if you look at it
That's a
closer,
high compliment.
it's the highest for me. Um, but you, and I think what probably helped also was the fact that I had been the colorist for 4 years on it. So with my color on there, it kind of gives an instant, oh, that's ElfQuest stuff, right? Which is another honor, is that my color is accepted as something that is instantly recognizable as ElfQuest. Especially since the fact that I am a colorist for ElfQuest who only wants ElfQuest to be drawn in black and white. And I'm also uh, I'm an ElfQuest artist who only wants ElfQuest drawn by Wendy Pini. So it's kind of a weird position to be in. Um, but I started drawing the book, and I'd gotten maybe 2 or 3 pages into it, and Wendy wanted me to go in a different direction for one of the characters. It was Jink, and I was going a little too cartoony. It looked very Dragon Ball Z-ish, with kids with 3 big heads, because that's what kids look like to me. And she said, no, more like this. And she drew like a rough drawing of the way she would like her to look, the direction. And I could tell the way she was drawing that there was such joy in her line. And I said, Wendy, would you be interested in just doing the roughs? Because then I could really get close to what you're envisioning here, right? And honestly, this is your story. You're telling the story, and I get that you don't want to draw it. I mean, drawing comics is a Herculean endeavor, and it really takes obsession, and obsessive behavior to even finish one. Um, but and she served her time. She did this for
Hmm.
40 years, right?
Yep.
But she still wants to tell a story. I said, well, why don't just the closer I can be to being your hand, producing this, so you can produce this still. She said, okay. She said, well, actually, she said, oh, I've been drawing the roughs anyway. I just didn't give them to you because I didn't want to step on your toes.
Yeah.
Step on my toes, Wendy. Give me those roughs. And so what I've told her is just draw as much or as little as you want, and then I'll take whatever you give me and turn it into ElfQuest. And sometimes it's I'm just an inker and colorist. Like this page I got recently is practically just inking. You know, and I'm always doing the color. Although, hey, no, that's not true.
Like version.
Occasionally, she'll do like a panel or two that she has this vision of what she
Hmm.
wants to do. She'll do it, and then so I guess technically my job is called a finisher, you know, but
Yep.
it's I never know what I'm going to finish. If I'm going to take something that's basically stick figures, or I'm taking something that's completely finished and I just got to tighten it up, you know. But regardless, I'm here for Wendy. I mean, I will always be her errant knight on whatever she needs done. She took my inability to reach a professional level when I became her apprentice, and I'd been struggling since '88, and I became her apprentice in 2001. But it just made a world of difference, and then suddenly I was able to be published on a professional level, and so I will be forever grateful. So whatever she needs me to do, I'm there for her.
So we're running close to our time. I just wanted to ask you to talk just a little more now. You're talking about how you learned about how that's affected the classes you now teach. Now that you're the master as opposed to the student when you're doing your classes.
Sensei Sunny. Yeah, I mean, I've always been a teacher though. I used to teach classes to kindergarten through senior in high school at the community theater. So I had a background in teaching anyway. Um, but I really love teaching. Whenever you see in the students' eyes that they get it, they get what you're, and that light goes on, and I don't know what happens there. I mean, in theater, I think they become possessed by a demon or something, but it happens. It transforms them, and they suddenly become
13th, I gotta get
theatrical.
the damn
And
contract
and
finished.
that to me almost makes me cry every time. I can't talk about it when it happens. I can't point it out because I will cry. But it's just an amazing feeling because not only they transform, you're transformed from the experience itself, being there for that moment. And there's nothing more rewarding than teaching.
Very, very cool. Thank you very much. I wish we could do more of this. I would love to talk to you more. This is fascinating stuff and really enjoying
Well,
it. I
thank
hope you
you,
had a good
Charles. I
time.
appreciate you having me on.
Yep. Danny! Danny!
Danny! Hi,
And
Danny.
with that, we've come to the end of the show before the show that will never begin.